Hey everyone, welcome to the Star Wars Canon. Today we're going to be talking about The Bad Batch, Episode 1, Aftermath. Guys, what'd you think of this episode?
I really dug it. First, just want to say, so glad we're back to having content to watch. It's really exciting. And I mean, I think The Bad Batch was a cool thing last year, and they're taking it to a place that could be really, really cool now. We start with 70 minutes of something, and it's a big way to kick off a new series.
Yeah, I really dug it as well. Echoing what you said, Dan, I'm excited to have some Star Wars content back. And yeah, the 70-minute episode was wild. You basically got a full mini story arc into one single episode. So it was a great way to kick off the new show.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was really cool to see these characters again, and I think they definitely answered the question of, can this crew carry their own series? They, in that 70-minute episode, really developed these characters in a really cool way. They all have their distinctive personalities. And another thing I'm sure you guys noticed and we'll talk about, but this episode looked fantastic. It just looked so good from the animation style to just the cinematic nature of it. There was a few times where I had to do a double take and was like, wow, they just, framed the hell out of that shot. It looks amazing. Some of the best Star Wars, cinematography, I think, of anything we've seen, frankly. So I think, we want to get into a recap here, do a little bit of summary of what happened in the episode. And Scott, if you can kind of walk us through the highlights of Aftermath.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, even though it was a 70-minute episode, it definitely flowed pretty smoothly. So we got a pretty nice story arc. We pick up with the Bad Batch, coming off of where we had last seen in the Clone Wars. We're now at the tail end of the Clone Wars, and they're assisting Jedi Knight Deepa Billaba and her Padawan Caleb Dune, who we know as Kanan Jarrus later in Rebels, as they're fighting on Collar against some of the final Separatists. And during this window, sort of where they're fighting, Order 66 is issued, and Billaba is killed. And as Caleb Dune is sort of escaping, the Bad Batch overhears the order. But given their sort of enhanced programming, they don't really feel the need to execute on it, with the exception of Crosshair, who kind of wants to capture Caleb. But Hunter eventually lets Caleb escape. This leads them back to Kamino, where they, sort of see an immediately increased military presence on Kamino and learn that the Clone Wars are basically over, that Grievous has been killed. And this is where we immediately start to see Crosshair and Hunter start to butt heads, as they have opposing views on whether or not they should have killed or captured Caleb. And they also were introduced here to Omega, who I think is going to be a big part of the series, and someone that we questioned about in the original trailers, whether this was going to be, who I think we all accurately kind of predicted. It was a female clone, and we learned that she's, genetically enhanced, similar to the Bad Batch. Admiral Tarkin then arrives to sort of take over sort of the clone operation, and evaluate whether the clone army is sort of any use to the newly formed empire. He definitely has it out for the Bad Batch. It includes a live fire test of their skills, basically trying to see if they'll survive, And then after sort of receiving Crosshair's report on Collar, where he learns, that they might not be, complying with Order 66 and might not be super loyal to the new empire, sends them to Onderon to eliminate a group of alleged insurgents and sort of test their loyalties. They get there thinking they're going to be, blowing away some insurgents, some robots, and they find out that they're actually just fugitives fleeing from the empire, led by Saw Gerrera, who we've seen, previously in animated stuff, but, most notably featured in Rogue One. And the Bad Batch decides to sort of defy these orders, and realize that, they're going to be hunted by Tarkin, and that they know that the Tarkin is sort of has it out for 5 genetically enhanced clones, and that there's 5 of them, but one of them, Echo, was sort of, repurposed and reprogrammed after some of the events that he had gone through. And so the actual 5th genetically enhanced clone that that Tarkin would be after is Omega. So they head back to Kamino to rescue her. they're captured upon arrival, and have to plan sort of an escape attempt. And in this window, Crosshair, who was definitely sort of in line and leaning towards following Order 66 and sort of following orders, he had a good line early on of, a soldier follows orders. He's a little bit reprogrammed by Tarkin and basically turns against the Bad Batch, and it forces the Bad Batch with Omega to escape imprisonment and then eventually flee Camino, leaving Crosshair behind.
Yeah, that's a great recap, Scott. So really interested to kind of dig into the episode with you guys. What were some kind of standout moments? Obviously, we got this surprise cameo with Caleb Doom, aka Kanan Jarrus, that we didn't expect, and we had Freddie Prinze Jr. coming back to voice him. But what really stood out to you guys from the episode?
Well, I mean, I do think we have to start right there at the beginning on it. I was totally shocked when we landed with those two Jedi being the starting point. I hadn't heard any rumors about that. I was trying to avoid it, but I hadn't heard any. Kanan's become a beloved character, and I think most people who've watched Rebels would recognize the name right away, but if not, you'd certainly recognize that Freddie Prinze Jr. voice coming through. Depa Billaba, though, has been around for quite a while. She was on the Jedi Council. We saw her, I think, in Phantom Menace the first time as a real person.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, last saw her in Clone Wars the last season in just a little hologram scene leading up to Order 66. So it was a really cool tie-in. And I think that sequence really reminded me of Fallen Order, and just pulled a lot of the feelings that you see of Cal Kestis running away as well when Order 66 takes over. And it's terrifying and sad, and it really made me once again appreciate the brilliance of George Lucas and Order 66, because I think when you first see it, it's like, oh, come on, how can they wipe out all the Jedi like this? But when you dig in on it and just see how this masterful plan is laid out to basically allow the Emperor to sneak in between both sides of the war and fighting on a totally different level, it reads really different when you see the conflict amongst the actual characters in those situations, and not just Ayla Secora falling over on Felucia or something.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Dan. I think, clearly, between Fallen Order and then the last episode of Clone Wars and kind of how we saw Ahsoka's perspective of Order 66, I think the extended universe, the extended canon universe, is really filling in a lot of gaps that we didn't necessarily get to see from Revenge of the Sith. Something I thought was really cool is they still, in featuring Caleb or Kanan, were really faithful to the Marvel Kanan comics that came out, I believe, a couple of years ago. So it was faithful to those in that, obviously expanded on that story of what happened to Kanan and his master, but still kind of hit the key points of it happening on color, and last words of Master Billaba were the same. So really like that they were able to kind of sneak that in and do it in a creative way. And quite frankly, like that whole sequence that played out with Hunter and Crosshair going, to search for Caleb, and like that kind of showdown between Caleb and Hunter at the waterfall reminded me a lot of like kind of the inverse, Empire Strikes Back, right? Like Vader extending his arm and like, trust me. But obviously, we know Hunter had the best of intentions, but really, really cool. And also continues to expand kind of the Filoni-verse, right? Like, giving credit to the guy who kind of took up the mantle from George and continued to build out this story by featuring one of his primary creations, which is a really cool, I think, tribute to him.
Yeah, I love the Order 66 stuff. Whenever it comes up, I never really get tired of it. And I think they actually played it, which I think they have the freedom to do with stuff like this, is they played it a little fast and loose with some of the Marvel comics and some of the Rebel stuff with Caleb in the past. I know in the comics it's really two existing troopers that Kanan or Caleb Dune had kind of befriended that seemingly are the reason he gets away, but it falls in that kind of gray area where you don't see all of it happen, so you don't know that the Bad Batch, could have been the ones to do it. And even in even in the credits for this episode, one of the clone troopers that's with them that sort of is helping, before Order 66 happens, is credited as Commander Gray, which is from the comics, the one that was like sort of, he was friends with before Order 66 happened, and that they had to sort of turn on them. But it definitely, I think that it was a clever way to sort of loop that stuff in, and in the comic, which is more targeted towards like a teen audience, he has to like sort of take down some of these troopers that were his friends, and like you see his master fall. And so like by dancing around it with this version and then incorporating the Bad Batch into it, you can have that sort of same story be told, but for a different audience and with different characters and different perspectives, which I thought was a really clever way to sort of bring this character back in.
And also just like, what a great intro to the Bad Batch again, to have them kind of come to save the day and then to quickly kind of like turn it on its head and have like this really horrific thing happen, and have that kind of be like the inciting incident for this whole story of like them questioning kind of the mission and the loyalty. And now we have this, this tension between members on the team. So just really, really clever, but while still, seamlessly kind of weaving into the existing canon that we all know and love.
The whole like thing with Order 66, the timing of this and those characters gave me some Captain America Winter Soldier vibes, like this distrust for the establishment, and like Hydra has infiltrated. Like the feelings there felt the same with the way the Bad Batch handled Order 66, with the exception of Crosshair, who came across more like Crossbones in that sequence. So like similar kind of a feeling that comes through. You did mention with Order 66, Scott, and just seeing it over and over again, it's like it's actually really cool to see it happen in different mediums, and like rewatching like Palpatine's crazy speech and forming that. It's just really neat. And I know it's super fan servicey, but I love that, like getting it again from the perspective of all these clones lined up, listening to their new master, basically.
Yeah, they did a lot of what they also did in the last season of Clone Wars, which was like show, events that were happening in Revenge of the Sith, and kind of give us the alternative takes of what other characters were doing at that time. And something I thought that was really cool about this episode is we really could almost watch this simultaneous to the last episode of Clone Wars. Like they kind of play like beat for beat in the same sequence, and even to the point of like, at the end, jumping ahead a little bit, but we have Crosshair, who kind of has this like procedure to amplify his programming. Well, in the last episode of Clone Wars, we see Rex getting that removed through a similar kind of procedure. So a lot of cool like callbacks and overlaps there, which I thought were fun.
Yeah. And I think one really cool element that we'll get with this that we haven't gotten in other ones is you kind of hit the Order 66 moment, and then either characters don't make it past Order 66 or they survive, and that they're in hiding because we're typically following Jedi or seeing people that are associated with Jedi. Whereas now we have characters that aren't Jedi, and it's going to go, for an extended period beyond that Order 66 sort of immediate window that we normally get to see. After that, we're normally jumping into, something that's pre A New Hope, not that sort of immediate aftermath of Order 66, which I think we'll get to see for the first time because we're not following people that are having to go into hiding because they have force powers.
What do you guys think of kind of the action sequences in this? That we really had, I guess, 3 distinct action beats. The opening kind of intro on Collar with the Bad Batch coming to the rescue, then kind of middle of the episodes, the sequence where Tarkin kind of throws the Bad Batch into this training sequence, and then kind of the end, which I thought was a really powerful moment, was this like showdown between Hunter and the remaining members of the team and Crosshair as they try to escape Camino. How did you guys feel about the action of this episode?
action was great. And as you mentioned in the beginning, the cinematography around the action was really great. I think probably for me, the training fight was the coolest. It starts with them, with no live fire, and they just demolish it. But then they bring out these, what are clearly early versions of Dark Troopers to fight them. And I mean, immediately up the stakes and hit Wrecker hard with a blast. To be honest, to what you were saying, Scott, about not knowing the fate of these characters, I actually was kind of worried that one of them might die during it, which I don't normally ever feel in Star Wars, that worried about that. So that was just kind of an interesting feeling I had, but seeing each of them use their powers in a unique way, particularly Tech in that, reprogramming the droid to go take them down, was super cool and clearly impressed Tarkin. But Tarkin, being the douche that he is, continues to be angry about these things, like, oh, why do they not obey? But I think like it really showcases the uniqueness of these characters, the kind of X-Men, Avenger-y characters, more than what we have in Jedi, who are maybe just pure superheroes, like at the purest level.
Yeah, I think that it was great that they highlighted them in each fight. Each fight, we got to see their own skills highlighted, but also how they work sort of in unison with each other. From the opening of trying to take out the 3 droid tanks, that Crosshair shooting a little thing that's daisy chain them all together, and then Wrecker's pushing them down, and then in the other fights we have Wrecker tackling one of the robots so that Tech can come in and reprogram it, and then I think Wrecker again throws a knife out that then Crosshair shoots the knife in midair to propel it across the arena into one of the droids. And even in the final sequence, they're sort of working in unison to basically escape, and they know how Crosshair works, so they're trying to work against their own sort of teammate in that moment. I think they did a really good job of sort of highlighting the strengths and weaknesses of each character sort of within the Bad Batch through these, like storytelling moments of just like action beats. You learned a lot about the characters in that way too.
Yeah. And the action is like, so I think clear to follow. A lot of the times action is shot in a way or depicted in a way where it's kind of like a little bit all over the place and confusing to like who's hitting who and what's happening now. And I feel like this was just so well choreographed and done in a way that you're like clearly knew where everyone was at any one time and what people were doing. And like you're saying, Scott, like add it to the story and enhance the characters. So they used action in a really smart way. One other thing I wanted to make sure we hit before we get into some predictions is the character of Omega. I think, one of the new kind of primary characters here. I personally really liked the character. Kind of got a lot of like, Luke Skywalker, naive kind of even a Rey vibe where, this is clearly going to be our hero who, is stepping into a larger world for the first time, but also really interested in kind of what her special ability is. Because clearly, she's enhanced as well, but we're not so sure. Might have some inclinations that she has something going on, but not really sure what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, Omega drew me in right away, and I think Omega is going to be a big hit from this and a big draw for the next generation of Star Wars fans. I mean, I think Dave Filoni, every time he's interviewed, says to remember that Star Wars is made for kids, and I think that character is going to draw kids in a really cool way. I think to me, a couple of things stood out that were interesting about it. One, the Kaminoans' reactions about Omega. What are they up to? I mean, they clearly have some alternate plan, which I think I'll hold until predictions, but I think there's a fairly obvious potential thing here. And then Omega throughout it continues to progress really rapidly with skills. Seems to have the ability of foresight in some way when talking through with Crosshair what he's about to do. And then pulls out the blaster and makes probably the best shot in the entire episode. So I think there's going to be some really cool stuff to unpack with Omega.
Yeah, I guess this kind of falls borderlines into the predictions, but I think you kind of have her immediate attachment to the Bad Batch, which is really interesting. And that my mind was jumping to, is this because she's aware that they're the other sort of genetically enhanced troopers? And so she's like a kindred spirit to them? Or is it that they have this notoriety of sort of all these things they've done? And like, clearly like rumors are spreading about their last mission. So she is a good person and is attached to them because they're a good person? Or is there something that, she's being propelled by everyone else on Camino and is sort of embedding herself in, in maybe a not so positive light, and we could see a turn from her. Yep. I think, that the way she's interacting with them so far is really interesting and has a lot of potential sort of paths that her character could go down with.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that obviously we're going to learn over the next 15 episodes of the season. So maybe kind of stepping into more prediction and speculation. Episode leaves us with the Bad Batch plus Omega kind of going off to meet up with a contact who we don't really know who that may be. Clearly, there's a few folks kind of out there. We know that Saul is a contact that they made during this episode. That be really surprised if we don't see Saul pop back up this season or at some point in this story. We also, of course, have Rex out there and Ahsoka and other folks who have this tie to the clones. So could easily see them at some point running across some of the characters we know and love from other series.
Yeah, I think it's pretty likely that it's Rex if I'm betting my money on the next person to show up. But I do remember there was a clone who had kind of built his own life as well that had crossed over in the Clone Wars, and that could be someone. And you also have the rest of Rex's crew you see in Rebels, like Wolf and stuff like that could be out there. So I'm hoping for any one of those. Honestly, it would be fun to see. And I think you have this ongoing thing now with Crosshair after them. And I did just want to mention on Canon stuff that it's kind of interesting, with Tarkin pulling the strings on that. We have shock troopers around him, which we saw back in Revenge of the Sith with Anakin, and putting him on the ship after he's burned up. And we also saw the modern version or more modern version of that in Mandalorian that nearly took out Grogu. And now you've got Crosshair wearing new armor that looks an awful lot like a Death Trooper to me. So they're doing a lot of like seed laying, I think, with some of those characters to build more of this empire in its prime. And the Bad Batch are going to be on the run from all of it, which is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where it goes. I think it, they met Saw and saw what he's sort of up to, in this kickoff episode. So I think he's a potential person that they could immediately go to if it's not someone like Rex or another sort of trooper that they think they can trust. That at least Saw could send them in the right direction in terms of like staying alive in this new post Clone War empire. And I'm curious to see, how much Tarkin is involved in the show going forward. I think they had set him up as a sort of good overarching villain, but Crosshair could be the one that sort of is doing his bidding. And I thought it was fun to see that they chose to use Tarkin again, especially after sort of the way we know Tarkin, is and treats sort of Vader as kind of semi underling in the original trilogy, and then in Rogue One comes in and takes over the sort of Death Star program from Krennic. And here we are now. This thing is, one day after the Clone Wars ending, he's stepping in and taking over the clone army. It's sort of fun to see his sort of MO expanded across all these different facets of the Empire.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up Crosshair, Scott, because I certainly have a suspicion that this season we see potentially Crosshair be redeemed in some way and come back to the Bad Batch. Certainly would be in line with kind of the theme of redemption in Star Wars. And I think I said this to you guys when we did our trailer video for the last Bad Batch trailer, but given Omega's age and the fact that, obviously she's maybe the last of Jango Fett's clones, really curious to see if we somehow see her in Book of Boba Fett or see any of these other characters in Book of Boba Fett, given the Jango connection that they all share. But she in particular, given her age, could definitely be involved in that story.
Yeah, I'm curious if she is age altered or not. So like, is she being Omega? She's the last one, I'm assuming by that naming. So she could just be young, but you just for some reason feel like she's probably not. Like she's like Boba and has this is going to live a normal life with it. That being said, I think like the big prediction that we have to probably discuss is Omega Force sensitive, because I think they were definitely hinting at it a lot with what we were seeing in the episode. And it could just be a mixture of all the powers of the Bad Batch sort of that we're seeing. But if she's force sensitive and the Kaminoans were up to that, it would explain a lot of what's going on probably in The Mandalorian and ties kind of all that to the sequel trilogy. I mean, I think that becomes the Pandora's box of interesting connections to canon, basically, is if Omega has force sensitivity.
Yeah.
If so, where'd it come from?
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing to bring up, especially because one thing that surprised me when you get Palpatine sort of addressing everyone is he even says, like, I'm scarred and broken, but I'm alive. And so he publicly has sort of addressed the fact that, he's in this like wounded state. And we know that, what all the efforts he sort of takes to try and rebuild his body and do all this stuff. So that's an interesting thing to think that, it could have been all tied in with this. And then one thing you had mentioned briefly, Josh, was that I don't think we had talked about in previous stuff. And when we talked about the trailers, that we do know this season is 16 episodes now. That we had questioned, like, oh, we just gotten, WandaVision and we're getting Captain Winter Soldier and Falcon from Disney Plus, that they were 6 episodes and 8 episodes, that we wondered if this could be another 8 episode sort of arc like we had gotten with the last season of Clone Wars. But we do know now that this is a full 16 episodes, and knowing from the sort of information that's come out that the next 2 episodes will be closer to 30 minutes. So I think we're going to get a lot of content around that.
Yeah, and also with that, Scott, I mean, I think maybe we had speculated this in the last trailer breakdown we did, but I think we're all feeling like there's a good chance that, one or more of these characters might be killed off in this series, particularly if it was going to be a one-off series. But based on the 1 or 2 interviews the creators, showrunners have given, it seems like they're not sure if this is going to be a one and done season or if it's going to be a continuing story. So that kind of makes me wonder if we will see any of these characters die. I do think, though, if I had to place my chips on one character being in jeopardy, I think Echo might be the one to go, just because, again, they could really, I think, pay off his arc from Clone Wars through this show in a really satisfying way and make him maybe sacrifice himself for the team or something like that.
I could also see Crosshair dying in Redemption would be one of my things. And I mean, again, this is a real big speculation, but let's just say they really tied it to Mandalorian and we see Grogu or something eventually. Like maybe he has a change of heart on protecting a Jedi at some point. Like, could be an interesting way for him to go out.
Or saving Omega too.
Or saving Omega. Yeah. That definitely makes sense. I think too, I just want to say with the 16 episodes, this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I actually really love what people call filler episodes in these cartoons. Like the Clone Wars had a lot of that, and to me it built the world and really made the prequels so much better. And some people just want pure follow the story, but I'm hoping with 16 episodes we're going to get a handful that are a bit side questy and see new planets and meet new species and things like that I'm personally predicting and hoping happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
just go
ahead,
Scott.
I was just gonna say that right in line with that, I think you see whenever I see the like, hey, I want to catch up on Clone Wars, there's like these are the like canon must watch story arcs, and it always doesn't include a couple that I think are some of the most interesting ones, especially that sort of tie into this and other series that have come out since then. Like, you know, some of the arcs where Clone Troopers Order 66 sets off early and things like that. You know, those aren't included in sort of the official like must watch, you know, to catch up on Star Wars lore episodes. But I think even just the introduction of the Bad Batch was technically kind of a filler arc in the last season of Clone Wars.
True.
And I think you do get a lot of really interesting side stories out there. So I would assume, given sort of 16 episodes and the target audience, we're probably going to get, you know, at least a few filler episodes, if not, you know, like a mini side quest arc that's sort of in the midst of this whole season.
Yeah, totally. One last thing I wanted to say, you guys, I think brought up a really good, interesting point about tying into Mandalorian and this concept of cloning a force sensitive being, and it very well could be. And as we're thinking through, like, what were the Kaminoans like doing? Because clearly they're up to something. You know, maybe they are in fact in league with Palpatine, and it's, you know, so kind of dark ops that only Palpatine knows, and he's working directly with them, and even like Tarkin at his level isn't aware of what's going on. Because we are, of course, you know, as we go to kind of the original trilogy timeline, you know, clones are being phased out, and we have stormtroopers. So maybe Palpatine is just trying to, like, again, keep the cloning technology close to the chest while he figures out how to clone himself, you know, later on down the line.
Yeah, that would be really cool if he was working with them behind the scenes, and would just further make it interesting for Palps, because I feel like he loves to play every side of the game.
Yep. Well, everyone, thanks again for taking the time to watch Star Wars Canon. As always, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We'll be doing videos for every episode of The Bad Batch, the next 15 that come out. And again, thank you for watching, and have a great week, Plankers.